The Captive Heartless Love. Synopsis. Experience the thrilling tale of Khamron, the son of a man who killed the father of Darin, the woman he loves. Will love prevail over vengeance? Will Khamron's feelings for Darin, his captive, fade if one day he begins to suspect her of murdering his father out of revenge? And what will happen when he discovers that she is carrying his child? Stay tuned to find out. Chapter 1. Execution. Khamron, a 10-year-old boy, felt a rush of excitement as the car he was riding in with his father and their driver headed toward the Golden Orange farm. He tugged on his father's sleeve. Father, where are we? Jelifong, a man in his 30s, gave a cold smile and gently patted his son's head before replying. You'll find out soon enough. Be patient. I have something important to teach you. The boy grew even more thrilled, letting go of his father to peer out the window. A 6-year-old girl with twin braids was hopping off a local truck, carrying a school bag. Her bright smile captivated him. She's so cute. Father, I wish I had a little sister like her. His father frowned slightly, glancing briefly at the girl, before the car drove past her. Lost in his own thoughts, he remained silent. When they arrived at a small wooden house that could easily be mistaken for a hut, a man was corralling hens into their coop. Upon noticing their arrival, his face turned pale. Jelifong gave a grin that resembled a demon in a nightmare and greeted him. Suphan, my old friend, how have you been? His voice was deep and smooth, but Khamron couldn't understand why the man facing his father was trembling so much, even dropping the hen he had been holding. JJ Jelifong. Suphan stuttered, visibly terrified. Just then, the little girl arrived, calling out in a sweet voice. Father. Khamron stared at the girl, wishing he could take her home with him. His father observed her and gave a faint smile. But Suphan rushed to his daughter, his voice trembling as he suppressed his fear. Darin, go play at Aunt Duan's house for a while. Darin nodded. Let me put my bag away first, father. No. Go right away. I'll come get you later, he urged, gently pushing her along. Khamron, puzzled, looked up at his father, who merely continued to smile serenely. Sending your daughter away? My old friend, you truly are brave and resilient. Sending her away? Khamron wondered to himself, desperate to understand what was going on. Jelifong, you're not letting me walk away as you once promised, are you? Suphan asked, his face pale as paper, but his eyes were resolute, just as Khamron's father had said. You're right. Today, I'm here as your Grim Reaper. Close your eyes, Suphan. Close them. Suphan shut his eyes tightly, his teeth chattering. Khamron felt tense, but when he glanced at his father, he saw him holding a gun. The boy was horrified. Father. Charan, hold Khamron, Jelifong ordered. Charan, the driver and a seasoned gunman, approached, placing a firm yet rough hand on Khamron's shoulder. The boy immediately sensed the man's strength and rigidity. Then, without warning, the sound of a gunshot rang out, bang, followed by 3 more in quick succession. Khamron turned to see Suphan collapsing forward, his head pierced by the bullets. Blood gushed like foam, filling the air with a metallic stench. Still reeling from shock, he heard his father issue another cold command. Bring me that little girl now. Charan released Khamron and hurried away. The boy grabbed his father, shaking him desperately. Father, what are you going to do to her? Jelifong knelt down, stroking his son's head affectionately with his free hand. She will be a gift for you, my son. Khamron couldn't understand. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. Then he heard the girl's cries. Before long, Charan returned, carrying Darin in his arms. Father! She screamed, struggling and sobbing. The little girl broke free and dashed to her father's lifeless body, shaking it in a desperate attempt to wake him. Khamron felt a deep ache in his heart. He walked over to comfort her, but the moment he touched her arm, the girl bit him hard. Ah! Charan strode forward and slapped Darin hard across the face. Smack! Charan, stop it! Khamron yelled, rushing to cradle the distraught girl. She looked up at Charan with eyes filled with vengeance and hatred. But she made no further sound. Jelifong calmly cleaned his beloved gun with a handkerchief and spoke as if nothing had happened. It's time to go home, Khamron. Bring Darin into the car. Charan continued to glare at Darin, alert to any threat she might pose to his employer's son. Khamron gazed at her with sympathy, reaching out to guide her, but she collapsed to the ground. Darin bent down and kissed her father's pale cheek one last time, coming away with blood smeared on her nose. It was a terrifying scene for anyone faint of heart. Finally, she walked ahead of Khamron, past Charon and Jelifong. When she and Khamron were seated in the car, Charon spoke to his master. "This child is dangerous. Be careful, she might strike back someday." Jelifong merely smiled in satisfaction. "Let's wait and see." He climbed into the car, while Charon's eyes reflected his unease. Without an order to eliminate the girl, there was nothing he could do. No matter how ruthless Charon might be, he knew he could never surpass his master in cruelty. On this point he was certain. He seated himself in the driver's seat. Looking in the rearview mirror, he saw Darin staring back at him with an equally chilling gaze. Chapter 2. A new lesson. These are all delicious. Why won't you eat anything? Sufa, Khamron's modern and youthful nanny in her early 20s, sighed in frustration. It had been 2 days, and Darin still refused to eat. The little girl sat staring blankly, indifferent to Sufa's attempts to cheer her up. "How about this?" Sufa tried a new strategy, her warm smile meeting Darin's overly mature, expressionless face. "I'll do anything you ask, but you have to eat in return." Darin shook her head. She knew Sufa was kind, but no one could truly help a pitiful child like her. "Please, won't you eat? If you don't eat for another day, you'll get sick." "If I get sick, I won't grow up, right?" Darin asked. Sufa clapped her hands together and snapped her fingers. "Exactly, my little one. There's so much waiting for you in the future when you grow up." She meant a bright future, but Darin's thoughts wandered in the opposite direction. The faces of Charon and Jelifong haunted her memory. "Fine, I'll eat," Darin said softly. The little girl picked up her spoon and began eating. Sufa was so relieved she almost cried, stroking Darin's hair with a mix of pity and affection. From a distance, Charon watched. He had secretly admired Sufa for a long time, but she despised him. She had witnessed his cruelty, which starkly contrasted with his handsome appearance, creating an irreconcilable contradiction. While watching Darin eat, Sufa felt someone's gaze and turned to see Charon's tall, muscular figure dressed in dark tones. She lifted her chin defiantly and turned away, meeting Darin's curious gaze. "Do you not like him, PPA?" Darin asked. Sufa wrinkled her nose and smiled. "Not really. Now look at you, eating so much. You've earned a reward." Sufa was overjoyed. Just then, Khamron walked into the kitchen. Seeing the scene, he also felt happy. Over the past 2 nights, he had heard Darin crying out in her sleep, calling for her father in anguish. It filled him with guilt. "Sufa." "Oh, Ron," Sufa said, using his nickname casually. No one minded that she called him that, despite her informality. "Heading to school? Have you eaten yet?" she asked while swiftly preparing hot Milo and buttered toast drizzled with condensed milk, serving them with her usual efficiency. Khamron took a seat and smiled at Darin, but she ignored him completely. "Is it good, Darin?" he asked. Silence. But Khamron wasn't upset. On the contrary, he felt a growing affection for this round-cheeked girl with dimples. "Tomorrow, you'll be going to the same school as me," he said, taking a bite of toast. His eyes stayed on Darin. "Yay! We'll be at the same school. After school, let's have ice cream every day until we're full." Darin ate quietly, but her mind wasn't calm. The gunshots from that fateful day echoed in her head. She would never forget them. The next day, Darin started her first day at the new school. Though it was an elite institution attended by children of the wealthy, bullies were a universal constant. "Hey, new girl!" a boy called out. Darin, a quiet child, was eating lunch alone in the cafeteria. She turned to glance at him briefly before returning to her fried rice. "Are you deaf?" The boy and another child swaggered over. His name was Audra Witt, though everyone called him AUD. The son of a politician, AUD's reputation for mischief far exceeded normal limits. Even teachers feared him. After all, he had once lifted a teacher's skirt just for fun. Darin felt a surge of tension. One of AUD's friends poured red juice over her head, the liquid soaking her face. She sat still, gripping her spoon tightly. "Whoa! Tough girl, huh?" AUD sneered, tugging at her neatly braided hair, which Sufa had meticulously styled that morning. Some students watched from a distance, some amused, others too scared to intervene. Emboldened by their reactions, Aud grew bolder. In pain and full of anger, Darin turned to face him with a terrifying expression. Aud froze for a moment, startled, but quickly regained his composure, glaring back. "What are you staring at, you little mutt?" Thud. No one expected Darin's school shoe to send Aud sprawling on the sticky juice-covered floor. Furious, Aud scrambled to his feet, ready to punch her, but Darin threw her plate of fried rice at him instead. Aud staggered, slipping on the wet floor and falling again. "T. Help me take her down." Unable to handle her alone, he called for backup. T, the boy who had poured the juice, approached, ready to grab Darin. "Stop that right now." A female teacher stepped in, but T shrugged, dismissing her authority. She was just a substitute. His father's position far outranked hers. He yanked Darin's arm forcefully, twisting it. Her hand throbbed with pain, and the teacher seemed powerless to help. But luck was on Darin's side. "T. Stop this instant." The voice startled T. He turned to see Khamron, the son of his father's employer, and immediately paled. Releasing Darin, he stood rigidly at attention, as did Aud. Khamron strode over to Darin, his presence commanding. The bullies looked like scolded dogs. "Are you hurt, Darin?" "No," she said, shaking her head. A new feeling blossomed within her. The realization that Khamron could protect her. Darin smiled at Khamron, who smiled back, pleased with her earlier bravery. Though the two children had vastly different emotions, something unexplainable began to bind them together. That bond would grow stronger, unbreakable for years to come. Chapter 3.1. The Love Between Khamron and Darin. 12 years later. They shared a secret relationship no one else knew about, except perhaps Sufa. Yet the beautiful nanny never uttered a word, continuing her duties flawlessly. In front of everyone in the household, Darin was merely a captive of Khamron's family. To the outside world, at school or university, they were siblings. Ever since 12 years ago, no one dared to approach Darin romantically. Khamron's stern demeanor was enough to keep any admirers at bay. When she resisted his control, he would passionately assert his authority in private as a lesson. Darin was no naive young girl. She loved Khamron, but her lingering grudge never faded. To the household, she might be a captive, but behind closed doors, she was a queen. Khamron adored her, even to the point of offering his life for her. "Darin," he whispered, "don't pretend. You're done, but I'm not." A sly smile appeared on Darin's face, and Khamron knew she was teasing him. Without another word, Darin rested her head on the cushioned surface. Warm water swirled around her body as liquid soap bubbles began to form, poured by Khamron's strong hands. He set the bottle aside and started massaging her head. His gaze, fixed on her, revealed a mix of possessiveness, jealousy, and ultimately, love. "Next month, I have to go study in America. Come with me, please," he pleaded. He always had to ask, and every time Darin would shake her head. How could he not know what she was thinking? 12 years had passed, but her anger from that day had never faded. Time and again, it was Khamron who shielded her, deflecting his father's wrath. It was only because of Khamron's pleas, both in words and looks, that she escaped punishment. "I want to study medicine here," Darin replied. "At least it makes me feel close to my father." She closed her eyes, forcing back tears. "It shouldn't have to be this way." Khamron stopped massaging and stepped into the warm bath with her, sinking into the water. "But father wants you to study there with me. Besides, if I'm not here, who will protect you?" Chapter 3.2. The Bond of Love. "Stay here with me, Prawn. Please, if you truly love me," Darin pleaded, her hand reaching out to stroke Khamron's arm. Her eyes were filled with deep longing, and the man could only groan in response. "Oh, Darin." "Then just go," she said, turning her face away in a huff. "I need to stand on my own. Don't play games with someone like father." "It's not worth it," he warned her. "Who is this father of mine?" "Speak properly, Prawn," Darin snapped, her tone defiant. "I know, Darin. I remember everything. But you can't expect me to protect you every single time. I need to go study abroad to prepare for my responsibilities at the company." "Or the arms business," she retorted. "You train every Friday. Why not take me along? I want to learn how to protect myself. Khamron narrowed his eyes, a knowing smile spreading across his face. And who was it that secretly took my gun to practice? Don't tell me you're still not a good shot. Darin flushed slightly, the truth hitting her. That was one of the reasons she had grown close to Khamron. She thought giving herself to him was worth the cost. Prawn. I know everything about you, Darin. You can't hide anything from me, or from Father and Charon for that matter. At the mention of Charon, Darin touched her face, recalling the taste of blood from the corner of her mouth on that unforgettable day. She stood abruptly ready to leave, but Khamron pulled her into his arms, whispering softly into her ear. I won't let anything happen to you. Darin leaned into him, her lips brushing against his neck in a gentle bite. Khamron closed his eyes, his body tensing with arousal once again. Darin! Stay with me. Stay with me, she urged. Khamron felt an ache in his chest. He loved the woman who wanted to kill his father. But how could he blame her? If their roles were reversed, he would have been even more consumed by rage. I have to go, he murmured. Then go. I'll stay here, Darin said, her eyes a mixture of seduction and sorrow. Unable to resist her any longer, Khamron pulled her onto his lap. Her soft curves pressed against him, sending shivers through her body. His lips claimed hers in a fiery kiss, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, tangling her fingers in his hair. He growled, not out of anger but from primal desire. She knew exactly how to provoke him, and he responded in kind, nipping lightly at her neck. Darin let out a soft cry as passion enveloped them once more. Her body responded instinctively, moving in rhythm with his. The intensity of their connection was overwhelming, and as she reached her climax, Khamron wasn't far behind. Just as he was about to pull away, his ears caught the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the room. It was his father. Ah! He gasped, releasing himself one last time. Darin was about to scold him, but Khamron quickly covered her mouth, whispering, Stay here. Father's just outside the door. Her eyes sparkled, not with fear, but with the cunning gaze of a queen rather than a captive. Knock, knock, knock. Khamron stepped out of the tub, water dripping from his muscular frame. Darin sank back into the warm water, waiting for the intruder to leave. Come in, father, Khamron called. Jelifong, now older but still formidable, entered the room. His eyes scanned the rumpled bed and scattered clothes. Who are you with? A woman, Khamron replied simply. Who? Instead of answering directly, Khamron gestured for his father to come in, then walked to the sofa in his robe. Jelifong followed, shaking his head. Quite the intense session, judging by the state of things. Khamron offered a sheepish smile. But never mind that. I need to ask you something. Is your woman in the bathroom? Jelifong asked, uncertain. Though no one dared interfere in his affairs, Jelifong was always cautious. Many careless men had lost their edge and their lives. He prided himself on his vigilance. We can talk on the balcony, father, Khamron suggested. Fine. The two men stepped out to the balcony, leaving Darin to fume silently in the bathroom, unable to eavesdrop on their conversation. Frustrated, she dressed quickly, vowing to herself that the opportunity for revenge would come again. Outside the room, she encountered Sufa, who still served as both her and Khamron's nanny. Sufa regarded her with a knowing glint in her eye. Got a moment? Let's talk, she said. Though tired and longing for rest, Darin nodded with a weary smile. Of course, Sufa. Chapter 4. Well-meaning advice rejected. What did you want to talk about, Sufa? The two sat down in a pavilion by the pond. Sufa, now in her 40s, remained single but exuded the same confident beauty as always. Why won't you go study abroad with Ron? You two are so close, Sufa said, carefully choosing the word close to hint at the deeper bond between them. I want to study here, Darin replied. As I've said before, it keeps me from forgetting my father and how he died. Sufa sighed and took Darin's hand, holding it with the affection of someone who loved her just as much as Khamron did. Darin, you're living a comfortable life now. Why not let go of that burden? And you're still having nightmares every night, aren't you? Yes, Darin admitted. I still dream about it. In the dreams, my father asks me why I haven't acted yet, even when I've had the chance. Her expression was cold as she spoke. Your father wouldn't ask you that. He'd want you to live in the present, not the past, Sufa said gently. Darin gave a faint, mocking smile. Tell Prawn about this after I've settled everything. By then, I won't be here to tell him myself. Darin. I only want what's best for you, Sufa pleaded. I know. Thank you, Sufa. But life has no meaning for me if I don't accomplish what I've set out to do. Their eyes met, and both women understood the depth of affection they shared for each other. Ron has always been good to you. He's never treated you like a captive. He loves you with all his heart, Sufa said, her voice softening. Darin's smile turned smug. Then let's see, Sufa. If he'll still love me after I destroy something he holds dear. Then I suppose there's nothing I can say to convince you anymore, Sufa sighed. You can say whatever you want, but I'll decide whether to listen. Speaking of which, why haven't you started a new life for yourself, Sufa? Darin asked, her curiosity genuine. It puzzled her that someone as intelligent and accomplished as Sufa, with a master's degree and endless potential, would choose to remain a nanny in this grand mansion. Sufa gave a sad smile, her usual confidence crumbling. I'm attached to you and Ron. I've told myself that if you went abroad with him, I could finally leave without worry. But since you've decided to stay, I suppose I'll have to remain here too. Darin was stunned. Sufa wasn't even directly involved in her situation, yet she was so deeply invested. Oh, Sufa! Darin's voice faltered, her throat tightening. She could only bow her head and walk away. Sufa watched her go with a sorrowful expression, knowing Darin would never change her mind. What were you two talking about, Sufa? That girl seems stubborn, Charon's voice interrupted suddenly. Startled, Sufa turned to face him. Have you been eavesdropping? What did you hear? She asked nervously. Charon, his once handsome face now marked with a scar near his left eye from 5 years ago, chuckled. I didn't hear much. She ran off too quickly. But I know one thing, you didn't get through to her. Serves you right for being nosy, Sufa snapped. She started to leave, but Charon grabbed her hand. 15 years. Sufa. Haven't you thought about giving me a chance? He asked, his dark eyes glistening with hope. Sufa smirked. Maybe I've stayed single because I've been waiting for you, Charon. But listen, we're from different worlds. She pointed a finger at him and tapped it on his chest, where his heart beat steadily beneath his shirt. And what's wrong with that? Different worlds or not, it doesn't matter, Charon countered. Let go. We're different. Charon. I'm warm-blooded, but you're as cold as the cruelest beast alive, Sufa said, pulling her hand free. She laughed mockingly and walked away, leaving Charon to watch her retreating figure with a bittersweet smile. But my heart beats in rhythm with yours, Sufa, he murmured. He found joy in loving her from afar, content as long as she remained single. But if anyone dared to take her, Charon vowed he'd slit their throat himself. Charon headed toward his modest yet elegant home, built on the estate by Jelifong's generosity. He was loyal to his master, not just out of duty but gratitude. Years ago, Jelifong had saved Charon's life when he was left for dead in a raging ocean. He still remembered that day vividly. A young fisherman from Kon Kane, Charon had been betrayed and struck on the head by colleagues before being thrown overboard. Nearly drowning, he was rescued by a life buoy thrown from a yacht. What's your name? Jelifong had asked, sipping champagne leisurely from his seat on the yacht. Charon. Sir. My name is Charon. I'll never forget your kindness, the bedraggled fisherman had replied, his eyes red with pain and betrayal. Drink this, it'll warm you up, Jelifong had said, handing him a glass of amber liquid. Charon had gulped it down, feeling its warmth restore his strength. Chapter 5. With Love and Concern. Finally, the day arrived when Khamron had to leave for his studies abroad alone. His heart ached deeply, but he could not sway the cold-hearted captive who had a firm hold over his own heart. He would never hurt Darin. Not in a million years. Sufa, please take care of Darin for me, he said. Of course. Focus on your studies. It's just a little over a year, Sufa assured him, not wanting her beloved younger brother to worry. Yet she knew all too well how quietly stubborn Darin could be. Silent like a mule, though her expression never betrayed her defiance. Darin can take care of herself, Prawn. I'll text you, Darin said as she hugged him. Her heart longed for him, but her thirst for justice, rooted in her unrelenting grudge, was equally strong. "Darin, I love you. I truly love you," he whispered, careful not to let his father or Charon, who had come to see him off, overhear. "Focus on your studies. Don't even think about marrying a foreigner," his father admonished. Khamron bowed to everyone, turned to Darin with a wistful wave, and walked away, pulling his suitcase toward the boarding gate. Once he was gone, Jelifong immediately turned to Darin. "You focus on your studies as well. I'll arrange for you to train at a hospital owned by an acquaintance of mine." Darin bowed respectfully, her expression feigning gratitude. Charon, however, narrowed his eyes. He had never trusted her, not even for a moment. "I will become a doctor. I swear it," Darin declared with deliberate emphasis. Jelifong nodded and turned to leave, but Charon leaned in and muttered menacingly, "Don't think for a second that your dream will come true." With that, he followed his master. Sufa glared after him, muttering under her breath. "Always ready to bark for the boss, that jerk." "Let it go, Sufa. Let's head out," Darin said with a cheerful smile as if she were unfazed. "Where to, Darin?" "To that ice cream shop you and Prawn always take me to," she replied. "Oh, feeling like ice cream? Let's go," Sufa said, linking arms with Darin as they walked to the car. Later, after parting ways with Sufa, Darin carried her books to study at the university. There, her senior, Suthep, met her as planned. The two worked together, preparing for her upcoming exams. "Your brother's gone now, right?" Suthep asked, his face lighting up with relief. Khamron's intense glares had kept all the boys at bay, leaving Darin untouched by romantic advances. "Yes, Prawn has left. He'll be back in a little over a year." "Why do you ask, Suthep?" Darin replied, feigning innocence though she already knew the answer. Suthep reached for her hand, resting on the book. "Darin, I like you. I've liked you since the freshman welcome day. Will you give me a chance?" he said, his face brimming with hope. "Are you sure? I heard you already have a girlfriend. Someone named Champu." "I don't want to be anyone's third wheel," Darin said. Suthep shook his head vigorously. No, Darin. Champu and I are just friends. We only walk to the cafeteria together, that's all." "Really? If you insist, I'll believe you," Darin replied, offering a smile that gave him hope. "Great. I'll help you with all your subjects," Suthep exclaimed enthusiastically. "Wow, thank you so much," Darin said, her tone sweet. The two chatted and studied, oblivious to the same pair of eyes watching from afar. Eyes filled with dissatisfaction, ready to eliminate Suthep at any moment. As evening fell, Darin didn't return home. Instead, she headed to a second-hand bookstore on a deserted street. On her way, she passed a group of thugs smoking marijuana and laughing loudly. When they noticed the beautiful young woman walking by, they exchanged sly grins, clearly planning something. Inside the small bookstore, a middle-aged woman sat yawning at the counter. She was surprised to see a well-dressed girl enter, as her shop usually catered to budget-conscious folks. Darin, however, wore expensive clothes, white gold diamond earrings, and the latest designer sneakers. Her jeans alone were worth thousands. "How odd for someone so affluent to step into my humble shop," the owner thought. "How much is this book?" Darin asked, holding up a thick medical textbook on herbal remedies. 200 baht, the woman replied. Then, concerned, she asked, "Didn't you run into those junkies outside? You should be careful. Who are you here with?" Darin froze for a moment before replying with a nervous tone, "I came alone. Are there really gangs like that around here?" The shopkeeper sighed, slipping the book into a bag. "Call someone to pick you up. This area isn't safe," she advised, handing the book to Darin. "Thank you so much for the warning. I'll call someone from home right away," Darin said, bowing politely before leaving. The shopkeeper could only pray silently for the young girl's safe return home. Chapter 6, Cunning? The shopkeeper had no idea that Darin didn't call anyone. Instead, she retraced her steps, heading back the way she had come. As she expected, the group of thugs was still there, now drunk and emboldened. "Hey there, angel from heaven? How'd you get to be so drop-dead gorgeous?" one of them called out. Darin put on a timid, fearful expression, shrinking as she tried to walk past. She was almost at the main road. But did they really plan to let her go so easily? A rare beauty walking through their territory was too tempting. Where are you rushing off to? Come here. One of them grabbed her wrist, the same hand holding her bag of books, and yanked her toward him. The other 5 laughed with glee. Please let me go, Darin pleaded, her eyes glistening with tears that threatened to fall at any moment. I just want to go home. We'll let you go, after you cooperate with us, he said with a sinister grin, dragging her toward an abandoned alley. Darin struggled to break free. Let me go, she cried, wrenching her hand away and scratching his face in the process. Ah! The thug screamed in pain, but the others quickly surrounded Darin, cutting off her escape. Help me! Please, somebody help me! She shouted desperately. This is our turf, sweetheart, one of them sneered. Scream all you want. It's useless. Darin collapsed to her knees, trembling. Please don't hurt me. Take whatever you want, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Get up. Slap. The man she had scratched slapped her so hard that her face turned, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Darin's eyes flashed with anger as memories of her childhood surged forward. Memories of Charon's slap and Khamron stepping in to protect her. She clenched her fists, trying to suppress her fury. But Khamron wasn't here to save her this time. What could she do? Darin's lips curled into a faint smile, unnoticed by her captors. Come on. She was dragged deeper into the alley, leaving her bag of books behind. Her face remained a mask of terror, and the thugs grew more confident. But was she truly afraid? Was she really hopeless? Or was she waiting for someone? Lie down. They pushed her onto a pile of beer crates. Darin sat up, sobbing as one of the men stepped forward, grinning maliciously. His confidence was written all over his face. And then, bang! The man froze mid-action, his hand reaching for his belt. A bullet had pierced his head, blood splattering onto Darin's face. Ah! She screamed, fainting on the spot. What followed was chaos. Shouts of terror, the clash of fists and blades, and the screams of the dying. Then, hurried footsteps approached. Warm hands cradled Darin's head with care. Darin! Darin! Wake up! It was a man's voice. A voice filled with concern. Darin opened her eyes to find herself staring into familiar loving eyes that sparkled with an unmistakable intensity. She smiled. It wasn't just a smile of relief, but one of satisfaction. I knew you'd come for me, Prawn. Khamron's concern turned to confusion. Her sly smile was unmistakable. He clenched his jaw, realizing her cunning. Why are you so devious, Darin? He growled. Later, in a safe place, Khamron shoved her away in frustration. Darin didn't take offense. Everything had gone according to her plan. A plan to draw him out. Why did you do this, Darin? She looked up at him, a sly smile spreading across her face. Because I wanted to see you, Prawn, she said sweetly, her tone almost teasing. But why did you come back? Or rather, why didn't you get on the plane? Darin! Khamron's frustration grew. She had outsmarted him, knowing all along that he couldn't leave her behind. So you used yourself as bait and made me kill those thugs? He snapped. Sitting at the edge of the bed, Darin inspected her nails, her expression unapologetic. They deserve to die. They've raped and killed women at least once a month. Why keep them alive? But we're not gods of death, Darin. We don't have the right to kill, Khamron argued. Darin met his gaze, her voice laced with mockery. Then was the man who shot my father a god of death, Prawn? Khamron was left speechless. Chapter 7. Pleading. I have nothing more to say to you, Darin. Go home safely, Khamron said as he turned to leave. But the petite woman quickly stood and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his warm back. Where are you going? Stay with me tonight, please, she pleaded. Khamron turned around, his expression tinged with sadness. I miss you, Prawn, Darin said, her soft voice and pleading eyes disarming him. Her small hand rested on his chest, conveying how deeply she longed for him. But you're so stubborn, Darin. How could you do this to me? He muttered, though his heart still ached with love for her. He had always loved her, unwaveringly, and he always would. Darin stood on tiptoe to cradle his face in her hands, gently pulling him into a kiss. Khamron closed his eyes, letting her do as she wished. Her hands trailed down to his shirt, unfastening the first button. He caught her hand and shook his head. Not tonight, Darin. Her eyes pleaded with him, knowing he couldn't resist her for long. I love you, Prawn, she whispered. As always, Khamron's love for her triumphed over any hesitation. He gazed at her, then pulled her into a tight embrace, stroking her hair gently. I love you too, Darin. I love you so much, he said, kissing her forehead. Then stay with me tonight, she whispered. Before he could answer, Darin's phone rang. She glanced at him with a pleading look. It must be Sufa. Don't leave, okay? Promise me, she said. Khamron sighed and nodded, retreating to sit on the sofa. He picked up the remote to adjust the air conditioning as Darin answered the call. This is Darin, Sufa? No, I'm not coming home tonight. I'm staying at a friend's house to study. All night, she said, glancing at Khamron with a mischievous smile. He looked away but couldn't hide the small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. The conclusion was clear. He wasn't going anywhere tonight. After the call, Darin walked over to Khamron, slowly unbuttoning her student uniform. He couldn't take his eyes off her. When she smiled seductively, he smiled back. The tall man stepped closer to her petite, alluring figure. She was left in just her bra and shorts, her golden yellow skin glowing with the charm of an Asian beauty. To him, she was always perfect. Darin, why do you like teasing me? He murmured, nuzzling her neck. Darin closed her eyes, reveling in the affection he showered her with. I'm your captive, Prawn. I love you so much, she said. Captive? What kind of captive? Khamron chuckled softly. A captive of love, someone who loves you with all her heart. Flattered by her words, Khamron shook his head at her antics. He scooped her up and carried her to the bed, placing her down gently. As he undressed, Darin's eyes drifted downward, noticing his arousal. Prawn, you want me too, she teased. Of course, Darin, he replied before leaning over her, beginning their fiery dance of love once more. The next morning, Darin woke up feeling the absence of Khamron's warm embrace. Sitting up, she saw him, dressed in a bathrobe, reading one of the second-hand books she had bought. Prawn, she called softly. You're awake, he replied, looking up. Yes. Oh. She winced as she tried to get out of bed, the soreness from the night's passion evident. What's wrong? He asked, setting the book aside and rushing to her. The scent of his freshly showered body filled the air. Just sore, she admitted with a shy smile. Sore? Why? He teased, grinning. Prawn. Images from the previous night flooded both their minds. Darin buried her face in his chest, inhaling his comforting scent. This is why I can never leave you, he said softly. Does that mean you're not going abroad anymore? She asked hopefully. Khamron hesitated, worry clouding his expression. It wasn't just concern for her. His sources had informed him that his father was collaborating with a general on a large arms deal, drawing the attention of high-ranking law enforcement. He needed to act quickly. Why are you so quiet, Prawn? Is something wrong? Darin asked, immediately sensing his unease. She studied him intently, knowing something weighed on his mind. Determined to stay close to him, she saw an opportunity to uncover information that might serve her cause. It's nothing. But Darin, you promised me something once. Why did you meet that senior? He asked, changing the subject. See, I had to bait you. When you wouldn't come out, I had to take a bigger risk, she said with a playful pout. Khamron clenched his fists, frustrated by her recklessness. If he hadn't arrived in time, she might have been assaulted or killed. Stop doing things like this, Darin. I'm begging you, he said sternly. No. If you run away, I'll just keep doing it. Even if it kills me, she replied defiantly. Darin, don't say things like that. Now I'm angry, he snapped. Seeing his genuine frustration, Darin hugged him tightly and whispered. I'm sorry, Prawn. I'm sorry. But even as he held her, Khamron's mind was consumed by a new set of worries. Chapter 8. The Old Tiger. In the end, Darin had to return home alone, with Khamron insisting she not reveal that he was still in Thailand. Though puzzled, she nodded, deciding to uncover the truth later. At home, Darin found Jelafong visibly upset, engaged in a heated argument with a distinguished-looking man whose demeanor radiated authority. As Darin entered, their argument reached a crescendo. I insist, I know nothing about the accusations you're making, Jalafong said firmly. Very well, Mr. Jalafong. I only hope we don't have to meet under similar circumstances in the future, Colonel Pradeep replied sharply, his keen eyes scanning Jalafong before he turned to leave. As he passed Darin, he paused momentarily, their eyes meeting. Noting her curiosity, he quickly averted his gaze and exited without another word. Darin, come here, Jalafong called. Yes, father, she replied, the word slipping out unintentionally, a rarity, as she avoided addressing him as such. Perhaps the intense look in Colonel Pradeep's eyes had unsettled her. Will you do something for me? What do you need, father? Before Jalafong could answer, Charan rushed in, his tone urgent. Sir, don't do it. What now, Charan? Who's in charge here, me or you? Jalafong snapped. Charan lowered his head but couldn't hide his worry. Leave us. I need to speak with Darin privately, Jalafong ordered. Charan reluctantly obeyed, walking out with a heavy heart and a question lingering in his mind. Why has Jalafong grown so reckless? Is it time that's made a once powerful man complacent? When Charan had left, Jalafong turned to Darin and placed a hand on her shoulder. I need you to meet a client on my behalf. It's simple enough. Of course, Darin replied, masking her disappointment. She had expected something more intriguing. I'll handle it perfectly. Good. It's time you fulfilled your responsibilities. Don't let me down, he said, looking at her with the same piercing gaze he'd had 12 years ago. Suppressing her anger, Darin smiled sweetly, her thoughts swirling with resentment and plans for vengeance. After her conversation with Jalafong, Darin headed upstairs and was startled to find Charan waiting for her. Darin, he called, his voice steady. Feigning surprise, she replied. Oh, Charan. Are you calling me? Her tone and expression mocked him, making it clear she had not forgotten what he and Jalafong had done to her family. Yes, I'm calling you, he said, his voice flat. But I'm the daughter of your boss. Shouldn't you address me as Miss Darin? Like you do, Prawn? You're not. Not what? Say it again, she challenged, her tone icy. Charan gritted his teeth. This girl was far more cunning than he had anticipated, yet his master never seemed to waver in his trust of her. Forget it. Just remember this, Darin. Whatever you're planning, don't forget about me. I won't let you harm my master, he warned. Darin was taken aback for a moment but quickly recovered, smirking dismissively. Why would I? You're just father's lackey after all, she said, brushing past him with a haughty air. Charan watched her retreating figure with a heavy heart. No matter what, he would never let her succeed in her schemes. Determined, Charan sought out Sufa. He found her in her darkroom, developing photos. She scowled at him as he entered. What do you want? She snapped, rushing to close the door to protect her work. You haven't changed, Sufa. Still into photography, Charan observed with a small smile. It's none of your business. Besides, it's better than snooping around other people's rooms, she retorted, her tone sharp with irritation. Sufa, I'm here to ask you to talk some sense into Darin, he said seriously. Why? What's wrong with Darin? Sufa asked, her annoyance giving way to concern. I can see what she's planning. She won't succeed, not because she's incapable, but because I won't let her, Charan said firmly. Sufa stepped closer, her eyes narrowing in contempt. You stole a nestling and killed its family. Now that it's grown strong, you're afraid it will peck at your heart? Tell me, Charan, are you even human? Charan flinched at her words, swallowing the pain they caused. Whatever I am doesn't matter. Just keep an eye on Darin. In a few days, Jalafong will have her deliver a shipment of weapons. Stop her if you can, he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying his internal conflict. As he turned to leave, Sufa called out. Wait, Charan. He paused, looking back at her. Can you do something for me? She asked, her tone uncharacteristically vulnerable. Charan's brow furrowed. For Sufa, a woman of unyielding pride, to ask him for help, it had to be something critical. Chapter 9. A superior plan. Knock, knock, knock. Darin knocked on the door 3 times. Someone peered through the peephole before opening the door and pulling her inside, closing it securely behind them. Inside, the two embraced and kissed passionately, their longing evident. Minutes passed before they finally pulled away, smiling and laughing with renewed vitality. Darin, I missed you so much, Khamron said, planting another firm kiss on her cheek. I missed you too, Prawn, Darin replied. Khamron held her hand and led her to sit on the edge of the bed, scanning her face for any signs of wear or distress. Why are you staring at me like that, Prawn? Darin asked with a teasing smile. Khamron had been staying temporarily at this condo. The night before, he had received a tip-off that his father was planning to deliver the goods the following evening. Strangely, Jelafong had kept this from him, and even Charan, known for his sharp instincts, hadn't exposed Khamron's continued presence in Thailand. Something felt off, and the more Khamron thought about it, the more obscure and troubling it seemed. What's wrong, Prawn? Darin's voice broke through his thoughts. Nothing, he replied, snapping back to the present. When you went home, did you notice anything unusual? Darin smiled, careful not to reveal that Jelafong had entrusted her with an important delivery. She didn't yet know what the package contained, but she knew this was an opportunity to gain his trust, and to eventually destroy him. Nothing at all. Why do you ask, Prawn? She said, her voice calm and convincing. Khamron stroked her hair, relieved that she seemed oblivious. The less Darin knew, the safer she would be. Nothing. You must be tired. Why don't you take a shower? Your exams are coming up soon, and I'll help you study, he offered. Later, the two were lying on the bed, a medical textbook open between them. Darin rested her head on Khamron's lap as he explained potential exam topics. With you by my side, I feel so secure, she suddenly said, looking up at him with a sweet smile. Why's that, Darin? Because you're everything to me. You're my 10-in-1, she said, reaching out to trace the defined muscles of his abdomen. Her touch was enough to let Khamron know that Darin was growing restless with studying and wanted to shift to a different kind of activity. Should we finish studying first, Darin? He asked, his voice husky. While he certainly wasn't immune to her charms, he still wanted to finish the task at hand. But Darin, as stubborn as ever, sat up and began running her hands over his face. She admired his rugged handsomeness, enhanced by the slight stubble on his jawline. Khamron, unable to resist her anymore, took her hands in his and kissed them, his heart pounding as it always did when they were together. She was his everything. Like her name, Darin, meaning star, she illuminated his life. But she was also a storm, unpredictable and overwhelming. Prawn, promise me you'll love me forever, no matter what happens, she whispered, her voice soft yet insistent. Darin, why would you say that? What are you planning? Instead of answering, Darin pressed her cheek against his rough jaw, breathing in his scent. Khamron smiled, dismissing her words as a simple expression of affection. He gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. I promise. I'll love you forever, no matter what happens. You can't take it back, okay? She said playfully, placing a finger on his lips before leaning in to kiss him deeply. Their kisses intensified, and soon textbooks and notes were shoved aside. The room filled with their passionate moans as they gave in to their desires, as if they hadn't been together for years. Darin, now bare, pressed her body against Khamron's, her lips teasing his sensitive spots. She reveled in the sound of his groans, which only fueled her excitement. Khamron's arousal swelled within her as he moved rhythmically, their bodies melding together. The bed creaked with their fervor as they alternated between leading and following in their dance of passion. Eventually, they lay side by side, laughter filling the air as they cooled off under the breeze of the air conditioner. I'm so happy, Darin said, her voice dreamy as she gazed at Khamron with adoration. Really, Darin? Yes, I'm very happy, she replied, though her thoughts were already elsewhere. Soon, her meticulously crafted plan would come to fruition. The wicked would face their reckoning. It was only a matter of time. Khamron, oblivious to her hidden intentions, simply pulled her close, holding her with unwavering love. He had no doubts, no suspicions, about this woman with an ice-cold heart. Chapter 10. A Sinister Plan. The day of reckoning finally arrived. The sweltering evening heat clung to Darin as she stood, dressed in leather, uncomfortably warm in her attire. Jelafong handed her a leather briefcase containing documents related to the illicit goods for delivery. Darin accepted it with a smile, her joy masked as excitement to double-cross him in the near future. Charan stood nearby, his expression grim. He was increasingly frustrated at his lack of involvement. The goods being sold to the Burmese buyer were worth a fortune, and the cash was to be exchanged hand to hand. Charan couldn't fathom why his master was being so reckless. Jelifong lightly patted Darin's shoulder. "Don't disappoint me, Darin," he said, locking eyes with her. Moments later, a scrawny man with glasses arrived to escort Darin. His nervous demeanor did little to inspire confidence. Charon finally spoke up, unable to remain silent. "Sir, I'll take Darin myself. General Fitzsanulok won't be pleased otherwise," Charon argued, trying to sound reasonable. Jelifong shot him a glare of extreme displeasure, silencing him instantly. Charon lowered his head and stepped back. "Enough. It's time. Darin, go now and handle this for me. Do your best. I'm sure today will bring me immense satisfaction," Jelifong declared, his voice filled with conviction. Darin nodded and entered a luxury limousine, briefcase in hand. As the car began to move, she glanced back to see Jelifong raising his hand in a gesture of farewell. Once the car was out of sight, Jelifong turned to Charon, who was fidgeting nervously. "The general isn't going to the location Darin is headed to," Jelifong stated. Charon's eyes widened in realization. "Does that mean we're going somewhere else, sir?" "Exactly. Now get the car ready," Jelifong ordered, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Charon rushed to the garage, where he found Sufa waiting for him. "Charon," Sufa began, her voice filled with urgency. Charon sighed heavily. He had just pieced together his master's real plan. "Sufa, I need to leave now." But Sufa grabbed his arm, her usual disdain momentarily replaced with desperation. "Where's Darin? Where did she go?" she asked, shaking his arm. "She was sent to another location," Charon admitted quietly, the weight of his words clear in his voice. "Tell me where." "I'll go to her myself," Sufa demanded. "No. It's too dangerous," Charon protested. "Then I'll call her to warn her that she's being set up," Sufa countered. "You can't." Jelifong took her phone, Charon revealed, his voice tinged with guilt. Sufa's eyes filled with tears as she slapped Charon across the face. "You said you'd protect her. You said you'd help me." Charon, stoic as ever, prepared to leave despite her accusations. Time was running out. "If you won't help, I'll kill myself," Sufa suddenly shouted. Charon froze and turned to see her holding a knife to her neck. Her trembling hand pressed the blade just enough to draw blood. "Don't, Sufa. Don't do this," Charon pleaded. "I'm not bluffing. I mean it," she declared. Seeing her determination, Charon rushed to disarm her, only to provoke her further. The knife pressed deeper into her skin. "Fine. Stop. I'll do what you ask," Charon relented. Sufa dropped the knife, tears streaming down her face as the blade clattered to the floor. "Do whatever it takes. Make sure Darin isn't fooled," she sobbed. "It's not that simple," Charon muttered, feeling the weight of her demand. "I have to go with Jelifong to another location. Please understand, Sufa," he explained. Before Sufa could respond, the sound of footsteps approached. Charon quickly whispered, "Hide now. Jelifong's coming." "Don't forget, Charon. You promised me," Sufa reminded him before slipping away. Jelifong entered, his face twisted with irritation. "What's wrong with the car? Why are you so slow?" "I wanted to double-check everything, sir. I didn't trust it," Charon lied, feeling a pang of unease. "And? Did you find anything?" "We're running late, and you know how the general values punctuality," Jelifong barked. "No issues, sir. Please get in," Charon said, opening the door. Once Jelifong was seated, Charon quickly scanned the area for Sufa before sliding into the driver's seat. On a yacht floating in a vast river, Khamron sat with a pair of binoculars around his neck, scanning the nearby boathouse. His informant had tipped him off about a major weapons deal happening that night. He noticed 3 cars arriving at the location, followed by 2 more. Khamron frowned and turned to his police friend, Tula. "Are you sure about this, Khamron? Your source said there'd be a massive arms deal worth hundreds of millions." "This looks too small," Tula remarked skeptically. "I'm not sure anymore. Let's keep watching," Khamron replied, his gut telling him something was off. Through his binoculars, he saw a woman in leather step out of one of the cars, flanked by fewer than 10 bodyguards. Something about her movements unsettled him. Moments later, a jumbo van pulled up, and 5 men in suits stepped out. The woman approached them and handed over the briefcase. Khamron's unease grew. He adjusted his binoculars for a better look, and as luck would have it, the woman turned toward him. Even from a distance, her face was unmistakable. Darin. It can't be. Khamron stammered, his jaw dropping. Tula, startled by his reaction, grabbed the binoculars. Who's Darin? My wife. Khamron exclaimed, his voice filled with disbelief. Chapter 11. Vengeance. While Khamron and Tula were frozen in shock, several police vehicles screeched to a halt nearby. Dozens of officers poured out, rushing toward the group. Damn it! Tula, get this boat to the dock now. Khamron shouted. Tula bolted to the helm, steering the boat toward the boathouse as quickly as possible. However, chaos had already erupted. Gunfire broke out, with the rookie bodyguards around Darin fumbling to return fire. The police, well-trained and prepared, easily took them down. Stop! Surrender now! You're surrounded! One officer yelled through a megaphone. Darin glanced around frantically, finally grasping the true cunning of Jalafong, the old tiger. Even in his later years, his wits and deceit had only grown sharper. Khamron reached Darin just in time, Tula close behind. Raising a hand to show he was unarmed, Khamron called out. Wait! Calm down. This might be a misunderstanding. He grabbed Darin's hand protectively, pulling her closer. The police moved cautiously toward them, while the so-called buyers revealed themselves as undercover officers. Khamron's heart sank. He understood now. Darin had been used as bait to lure the authorities here. What misunderstanding? An officer challenged, stepping forward. We have clear evidence. Sergeant, open the briefcase. The sergeant unlocked the case, but instead of documents for an arms deal, the bag contained boxes of diamonds. Everyone froze in shock. Darin stared at the glittering jewels, utterly bewildered. How do you explain these diamonds? The officer demanded. Khamron straightened his back, a calm smile on his face. We arranged to meet and deliver these diamonds to our client. As you can see, they're worth millions. And now, most of my men are dead because of you. How will you compensate me for this? The officer's face turned pale. Though suspicious, he had no immediate rebuttal. Very well. In that case, you'll need to accompany us to the station. No, Khamron snapped. My sister is already traumatized enough. I'm not going anywhere until you explain how you'll address your mistake. Before anyone could respond, Khamron pulled Darin into a waiting car, leaving Tula and the remaining bodyguards to deal with the situation. At his condo, Khamron turned to Darin, his voice demanding. Darin, tell me the truth. What's going on? Silent throughout the drive, Darin suddenly erupted in a fit of rage. Arg! I hate him! I hate him! She screamed, clawing at her hair in frustration. Khamron quickly embraced her. It's okay. It's okay now, he whispered. I hate him. I hate that man. Darin cried. No further explanation was needed. Her words revealed everything. Darin had been certain she could avenge her father, only to realize she had been the one deceived. Jalafong's treachery had struck again. I'll kill him. I swear I'll kill him, she vowed, her voice trembling with rage. Khamron's heart ached. The him she referred to was his father. Darin's words laid bare her true feelings, a fiery hatred that never faded. He held her tightly, his strong arms encircling her trembling frame. Exhausted, Darin cried herself to sleep, while Khamron sat silently, absorbing the depth of her pain. The sound of running water filled the room as Khamron showered, reflecting on the night's events. The arms deal was still going forward, just in a different location. Jalafong's greed had led him into a dangerous game, blinded by the allure of wealth. He seemed oblivious to the peril lurking around every corner. Emerging from the bathroom, droplets of water still clinging to his muscular frame, Khamron glanced at Darin sleeping soundly on the bed. She would likely sleep until morning, giving him time to act. He leaned down to kiss her forehead gently. A droplet from his damp hair landed on her eyelid, causing her to stir slightly, but he didn't notice. Dressed quickly, Khamron grabbed his keys and bag, leaving the room quietly. As the door clicked shut, Darin's eyes flew open. Before the sun rises, I will finish this once and for all. In a luxurious 10-star restaurant, soft music played in the background as wealthy patrons indulged in expensive drinks and meals. The venue offered every conceivable comfort: massages for the weary, beds for the tired, and anything else money could buy. In a private VIP room, several men reveled in their excess, smoking high-grade cannabis and sampling illicit drugs. Thanks to that girl, the arms delivery went off without a hitch. She's probably sobbing at the police station by now, General Fitzanilock said with a laugh. A beautiful woman perched on his lap. Jelifong, equally drunk, began to share a story. You won't believe this, but... The VIP room door opened abruptly. A stunning woman in a sleek bunny costume stepped in, her face obscured by a glittering rainbow mask. Charon instinctively drew his gun. What's wrong with you, Charon? You've been acting strange all day, Jelifong barked. The room erupted in laughter as the masked woman sashayed in with seductive flair. Every man in the room, except Charon, stared at her hungrily. Charon, despite his inebriation, remained on high alert. He wasn't fooled. Chapter 12. The Rabbit's Secret. The mysterious woman in the bunny costume stood confidently before the round table, her allure capturing everyone's attention. She seemed to be deciding whose lap she would grace. Impatient, one man stood up, ready to pull her onto his lap, but the nimble bunny spun away gracefully, drawing amused cheers from the room. Finally, she perched herself on Jelifong's lap. The 50-year-old man smirked smugly, feeling superior to the others. The men at the table groaned in disappointment, though General Fitzanilock wasn't ready to admit defeat. She's not interested in a man like you, the general teased. Come sit here instead. He patted the leather couch beside him. The bunny woman glanced at Jelifong as if asking for permission, her seductive gestures making Jelifong more possessive. Who said I wasn't interested, General? Jelifong retorted, laughing. Come on, little bunny, have a taste of this. He offered her a cannabis-filled cigarette. The bunny simply smiled, holding up a red capsule for everyone to see. The sight piqued their curiosity. Ah, something new, is it? How does it work? The bunny grabbed an overturned glass from a tray, flipped it upright, and filled it halfway with whiskey. With deft movements, she broke open the capsule, pouring its contents into the glass. The liquid changed to an unusual color, captivating the room. She then lit a lighter under the glass, creating a brief flame that she quickly snuffed out with her hand, leaving only a faint wisp of smoke. Impressive, someone muttered. The general's companion on his lap looked visibly envious of the bunny's charm and skill, suspecting she was brought in as a special attraction for the evening. The bunny extended the glass toward Jelifong with a teasing smile. Sir, be careful, Charon warned, his instincts on high alert. The bunny feigned disappointment, slipping off Jelifong's lap as if to serve someone else. But Jelifong, irritated with Charon's interference, grabbed her slim waist and pulled her back. Who told you to leave? Hand it over, he insisted. Smirking at Charon, the bunny held the glass aloft before presenting it to Jelifong. Charon, tense and suspicious, watched closely. Jelifong drained the glass in one go, drawing applause from the room. The bunny smiled in satisfaction as Jelifong leaned back, his demeanor triumphant. But within moments, Jelifong began to convulse, collapsing to the floor with red foam bubbling from his mouth. Boss! Charon yelled, rushing toward him. The bunny pulled out a concealed knife, pressing it against Charon's throat, halting him in his tracks. Her masked face leaned close, her intentions clear. The room erupted in chaos. Some feared the bunny, others were alarmed by Darin, who had emerged with a gun aimed at the group. She seemed dazed and uncertain, her mission now meaningless with Jelifong already dead. Slowly, she began retreating. Outside, the commotion was no less intense. A squad of police officers stormed the premises, led by a high-ranking officer. Seeing the situation escalate, Darin hastily pocketed her gun, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. Back in the VIP room, the bunny, preoccupied with Charon, didn't notice the general's companion sneak up behind her and strike her on the head with a whiskey decanter. The blow sent the bunny to the floor, unconscious. Charon, stunned, quickly lifted the limp bunny into his arms. Ignoring the stares and shouts, he bolted out of the room, carrying her to safety. Moments later, the police burst into the VIP room, their presence sobering everyone immediately. Outside, Darin had managed to escape unnoticed. She saw Khamron and his friend pull up in a car, their faces tense with worry. Khamron's friend tried to console him with a pat on the shoulder, But Khamron's eyes scanned the scene frantically. Darin's gaze shifted to another figure. Charon, sprinting away with the unconscious bunny in his arms. Confusion etched across her face. Who is under that bunny mask? Determined to find out, Darin turned away from Khamron and pursued Charon into the shadows. Chapter 13. Beneath her mask. In a nearly deserted alley, Charon's hurried footsteps slowed as he approached a pile of flattened cardboard boxes. Gently, he placed the unconscious bunny-costumed figure down. With a decisive pull, he yanked off the glittering mask, confirming his suspicion. It was Supa. Supa, he murmured through gritted teeth, the name barely escaping his lips. Supa stirred, her eyelids fluttering open, and upon seeing Charon's pained expression, she laughed bitterly despite the throbbing pain at the back of her head. "What's so funny, Supa?" he demanded, his voice a mixture of confusion and anger. "You still recognize me, don't you?" she replied, her tone dripping with mockery. Charon forced a wry smile, his face etched with conflicting emotions. "It wasn't hard. The knife you used, it's the same one you threatened me with earlier. And the way you held the glass. I knew immediately." Supa's smirk faded, and she slowly sat up, wincing at the pain. Charon, however, had more pressing questions. "Why, Supa? Why did you kill him? Did Darin push you to this? Has her hatred consumed you as well?" Supa shook her head, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I didn't do it for Darin. My hatred is my own. No less fierce than hers." "What?" Charon's voice cracked, disbelief spreading across his face. Supa sighed, her voice trembling as she delved into her past. "When I was a child, I watched my parents get murdered. Our home burned to the ground. And the man responsible? Your master, Jalafong. Even as a teenager, he was already a killer, born to destroy." Charon staggered back, her revelation striking him like a blow. Memories of their early days working for Jalafong replayed in his mind. He recalled how Supa had joined the household as Khamron's nanny, her calm demeanor hiding the storm within. Silence engulfed them until Supa spoke again, her voice heavy with resignation. "You still have a chance, Charon. A chance to avenge your master. Go on. Do it. I'm ready." But Charon remained motionless, the turmoil within him rendering him speechless. Finally he stood, his decision made. Without looking back, he muttered, "Take care of yourself, Supa. From now on." As he walked away, Supa watched his retreating figure, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. For all his flaws, she knew Charon's feelings for her were genuine, untainted by manipulation or deceit. Not far away, Darin had witnessed everything. The truth she overheard shook her to her core. Supa had acted as her vengeful hand, delivering justice where Darin's own courage had faltered. The next morning, Darin returned to the condo. She hesitated before knocking on the door, but when Khamron opened it, the sight of his anguished expression pierced her heart. "Darin! You're satisfied now, aren't you? You got what you wanted," he spat, his voice trembling with anger and pain. The stench of alcohol was overwhelming. "Prawn," she began, her voice quivering, but he cut her off. "You've destroyed everything. My father's gone and you." He staggered backward, pushing her away when she tried to steady him. "Prawn, I didn't kill him. It wasn't me," she pleaded. "Then who was it, Darin? Don't tell me you weren't there. I saw you," he shouted, his tone a mix of accusation and desperation. Darin faltered, unable to find the words. Her silence only fueled Khamron's rage. "Say it, Darin. Deny it." When she didn't respond, he grabbed her shoulders, shaking her roughly. But Darin, defiant as ever, shoved his hands away and lashed out, her voice filled with venom. "He deserved it. A man like him. A monster. But did you ever stop to think, Darin? My father wasn't without pain either. Your father betrayed him first." Khamron retorted, his words slicing through her defenses. "Liar. That's not true." Darin's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "It's the truth, Darin," he shouted, his voice echoing in the small condo. Darin staggered back toward the door, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and resentment, before yanking the door open and fleeing. Khamron's anguished voice called after her, "Darin!" But no matter how loud he shouted, she never returned. A year passed. Khamron's life had changed drastically since his father's death. Stripped of his wealth and influence, he lived humbly in a small house with only a few possessions to his name. Most of Jelifong's assets had been seized after his illegal dealings came to light, and his former allies had all but abandoned him. One morning, while sitting in a quaint cafe in Chiang Mai, Khamron opened a letter he had received at his old mansion, now forwarded to his new address. It was from Supa. Her confession was both a revelation and a heartbreak. She admitted to killing Jelifong out of revenge for her family's brutal murder years ago. Reading her words, Khamron felt a pang of sorrow, not just for his father's crimes but for the pain and suffering he had caused so many. But the next part of the letter shook him to his very core. Darin was 2 months pregnant over a year ago. By now, the child must be beautiful. I couldn't bear to let you live your life without knowing. Find her, Ron. Apologize to her. Make amends. For both your sakes. I will always love you both. Supa*. The letter slipped from his trembling hands as the weight of Supa's words sank in. His heart raced, his thoughts spiraling. Somewhere out there, Darin and his child were waiting. And this time, he wouldn't let them go. Chapter 14. The Search for Love. A black sedan brought the man from the city into the orange orchard, his heart filled with fervent hope. Before discovering the truth about who killed his father, Khamron had no intention of searching for Darin. But now, knowing the truth, and most importantly, learning that she had borne his child, he couldn't stay away. The house in the orchard still resembled what it had been 13 years ago, as though time had stood still. Except now, it was larger, surrounded by more homes and structures. Khamron parked his car on a hill where several other vehicles were stationed. Their beds were loaded with baskets of oranges of various varieties. He stepped out and began walking, each step making him feel like the 10-year-old boy he once was. He stopped when he saw a little girl standing and nibbling on a boiled corn cob. Her face bore a striking resemblance to Darin's as a child. The girl looked up at him, her face puzzled by the stranger staring at her. Feeling uneasy, she screamed, dropping her corn, which rolled to a stop against Khamron's polished black shoes. The girl bolted toward a woman carrying an infant. The woman turned and glanced at him, her expression a mix of shock and hesitation. She ushered the little girl toward the house while quickening her own pace to flee from him. Darin, wait! Though she heard him, Darin didn't stop. She adjusted the cloth shading the baby in her arms and kept walking. Khamron ran to catch up. Darin! He hurried to block her path, leaving Darin no choice but to stop. Her expression showed no warmth. Khamron glanced at the baby in her arms and then smiled, his heart swelling with hope. This is my child, isn't it, Darin? She shook her head, shielding the baby's face. No. This is my son with my new partner. Khamron's heart broke. But hadn't Supa told him Darin had been pregnant with his child? Darin, Supa told me everything. She told me the truth about father's death. It wasn't you who killed him. I'm sorry. Darin's demeanor grew uneasy. But the truth is, I didn't get there in time to kill him myself. And I was glad someone else did. That's the real truth. We can never be together, Khamron. Our time is over. Her words stung, but Khamron asked one more question, his voice trembling with desperation. Fine, Darin. But just tell me one thing. His intense gaze pleaded with her. Is this my son? Finally, Darin nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks as she bit her lip. Khamron felt his chest tighten with overwhelming emotion. He broke into sobs, struggling to contain himself. When you left, both Supa and Charan disappeared, too. The mansion was seized. All the wealth is gone, Darin. I have nothing left. Darin was stunned. She hadn't known how badly things had turned out. A pang of guilt and longing filled her heart. She wanted to comfort him, the man who had protected her through everything. But her pride wouldn't allow it. Can I hold him just once? Khamron asked, his voice raw with sadness. And then I'll go. You'll never have to see me again. His voice was steeped in heartbreak, tinged with loneliness. Darin hesitated, then decided to hand the 5-month-old baby to him. Khamron cradled his son, kissing and holding him as tears streamed down his face. The breeze from the orchard carried the sweet fragrance of orange blossoms. It reminded him of their love, fleeting yet unforgettable. After what felt like an eternity, Khamron kissed his son one last time. He handed the baby back to Darin, wiping his tears as he turned and walked toward his car. Couldn't Khamron? It felt like a dream. He stopped mid-step, turning to see Darin crying out, tears streaming down her face. He ran back to her, and they embraced tightly. Don't leave me, she sobbed. Stay with me. Stay with our son. I can't bear missing you anymore. Khamron was overwhelmed with joy. He kissed her forehead and then the baby's, his heart overflowing. I will, Darin. I'll stay. Thank you for letting me come back. Thank you. The three of them, father, mother and child, stood there in a warm embrace, mending their broken hearts. From that moment on there would be no more pain. Subscribe now for more interesting stories.